everyone. My name is Beyza. I'm research scientist at Cohere For AI, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest. And today, Alice. Alice is a professor in the School of Computing at KAIST. She obtained her PhD in computer science in MIT in 2008. Her major research area is at the intersection of natural language processing and computational social science. She has contributed significantly to projects that explore the ethical implications of AI, improve educational outcomes with automated systems, and address the challenges of multilingual and culturally aware computing. During our chat today, we will learn more about Alice's career journey, and please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A through our conversation, and I will be sure to give some time at the end for those questions. And welcome, Alice, and I'm really excited to have you here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's great that Cohere is doing this. I've watched several of the previous Fireside Chats, and they're wonderful, and I hope the audience will enjoy today's Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much. And I will start with our classic kickoff question, which is, how did you first get into AI and NLP research, and what was the initial topic you worked on?
So I was interested in language for a long time. I guess the motivation for me was that I had to pick up English as a second language when I was 11, when we moved to the US from Korea. And so I had learned no English at all before then. So it was pretty a lasting experience for me. It took me a couple years to really understand what's going on, in school and with my friends. And then I initially started to doing not really research, but just looking at what research is like as an undergrad at MIT in cognitive science, actually, how kids learn and acquire language. So it was human learning that human language learning that got me interested in language and doing research in language. And then I thought I would do something like that and went into computational linguistics for my master's degree at CMU. And so this was more than 20 years ago, but we were working on this project called The Communicator. And that is basically a dialogue system. So it was a spoken dialogue system, but it was task-oriented. So we were trying to build a system to replace travel reservation agents. And so that was my first initial project in research.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, actually, because I actually ended up in NLP, but I started from very different place to machine learning research in general. That's why, I don't know, I think your story is really fascinating compared to mine. Also, I know that you have worked on diverse set of topics in the machine learning and NLP, but one aspect that stands out is the overarching goal of using LLMs for social benefit. I'm particularly impressed by this focus. Could you share why fostering this connection between AI technology and societal improvement has become a central interest in your research?
Yeah, well, it's not that I initially wanted to go in that direction, but as I did more and more research with the wonderful students that I have at KAIST, I felt like every time we do something that makes the societal impact, students were happier, I was happier, and it was just more fun to write papers, more fun to do the research, because at the end we knew that whatever we do is going to have a positive impact. It's not just let's get out one more paper to put on my CV, on the student's CV. But it's really, even if the project isn't successful, even if our results don't change the world in terms of scientific progress, at least we're doing something that can potentially have a positive impact for the society and also lead other researchers into that direction as well.
Yeah, I totally agree to that. I think, yeah, that's really great direction to take. I'm very curious about one thing now. You said you moved to US when you were at 11. And after obtaining your bachelor, master, and PhD in US, you moved back to Korea. So what was the main motivation to get back to Korea?
So looking back, we weren't. So my husband and I, we were already married. We already had a child, and we weren't planning on staying in Korea for this long. We thought that we would maybe go back to the US at some point, but for our initial job after both of us completing the PhD, we got academic positions, tenure track positions at the same school in Korea. And KAIST, which is a science and technology university in Korea, is one of the most active research universities in Korea. So we felt that that was a really good opportunity. And once we came to Korea, our parents, both sides of our parents live in Korea. We were both, we both grew up in Korea, and it was nice to see our kids growing up in Korea, picking up the language and the culture and everything that comes. And so, and the university is also great. And I felt like I could make a difference, not just in my research career, but also in advancing gender diversity of our faculty and our students as well. So with all of that, we just stayed. I've been here for 15 years now.
Okay, yeah, that's really great. Turning now to the theme of today's discussion, which is the cross-cultural aspects of LLMs. I want to ask, how do we train and evaluate LLMs such that they are culturally aware? What are the challenges to measure the inclusivity and cultural awareness of LLMs?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a question for which I don't quite have all the answers. Looking at
It is tough. I know it is very tough, but
yeah, which makes it really exciting. We're just starting, right? So the workshops, there's a great workshop called C3 NLP. It's going to be held at ACL this year. I think it's in their third year or so. So C3 NLP stands for cross-cultural considerations.
Yep.
And so it's questions like this. So even, we know that the current LLMs are very good at fluent language generation, Command R3, Command plus, Command R plus,
Command R plus.
Command R plus, GPT models, Gemini, all of these models are really good at answering users' questions very fluently. But when you ask questions that require some cultural knowledge, other than the U.S. culture, so they're very good at the U.S. culture. But if you go step, right outside of the U.S. culture, for seemingly pretty simple questions such as, what do 5-year-olds eat for snack in Korea? The LLMs are not very good. So that is one way to measure cultural awareness. Do these models have cultural common sense? But to be able to do that, we need a benchmark data set, right? And we have some common sense data sets for English, but again, they don't really exist for other languages, and they don't really exist for other cultures. Because if you're just talking about English, English actually covers multiple cultures and not just the US. And so, you know, what happens in Singapore or even UK or Australia, South Africa, these countries, in these countries people speak English, but their cultural common sense is not reflected in the English large language models.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what tasks are particularly sensitive to cultural context?
Yeah, that's a good question. So far we have worked on hate speech detection. That's very culturally sensitive. So we had one paper in which like the Nazi, right? So the whole, you know, Holocaust. So if there is some hate speech against the Holocaust survivors, in English, the language models detect that very well. But if you translate the same sentence into Korean, for example, the translation is perfect, and anyone who can understand Korean can know that it is hate speech towards the Holocaust survivors, but then the Korean hate speech detector does not detect that. And the reason, the reason is it's actually pretty simple and obvious. It's because when we build hate speech detection for Korean, we get the data, the training data and the test data from Korean hate speech, which we don't really talk about the Holocaust that much. It's just in the history books, but we don't, everyday people, you know, we usually talk about, or their hate speech comments are directed toward other targets, you know, like gender-based hate speech or ethnicity and races that are minority in Korea. So because this topic is not within the hate speech data set for Korean, it just does not detect that as hate speech. And so that's, hate speech is one topic. Another related topic or related task is social stereotypes. So there is, in America or in the Western culture, there's hate speech, social negative stereotype towards African Americans, for example. Maybe certain religions like Muslims, they say, you know, are violent or terrorists or something like that. If you look at the Korean society, we have negative social stereotypes towards Chinese, for example, or Japanese, because they're our neighbors, and you know there's some hostility, for historical reasons and such, and so those social stereotypes. Not all of the social stereotypes are culturally dependent. For example, like stereotype against the elderly is universal across, at least for Korea and the US, but you know, racial or ethnic social stereotypes are very different in the two cultures. And then another task that we are looking at recently, it's not, I don't know if we can call it culture, but looking at factuality is also one that you can say is culturally dependent. So the language models, if you ask about certain people, let's say like Barack Obama, right? Barack Obama is a famous figure across all languages, all cultures. So if you ask about Barack Obama in any language to these language models, the answers will be very factual and detailed and very little hallucination. But then if you ask about, I don't know, an African leader, a leader of, you know, Egypt or Greece or, you know, some other country, let's say in Korean, the answer is going to be non-factual. There's going to be a lot of hallucination. And so I guess it's sort of like geographical knowledge or knowledge that is concentrated in certain geographic regions, they tend to be, when you ask LLMs about those types of facts, LLMs are not very good, especially in different languages.
Yeah, but it's not only about the multilinguality, right? It's more about that cultural differences.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Right. So yeah, it's all of that. It's both. It's the combination of the language and the culture. So if you have a low resource language and low or less well-known culture, or culture
Yeah.
that is very different from the Western culture, then the accuracy goes down dramatically.
Yeah. Okay. So that brought up a question. So how do we define a low resource culture, and how we can improve on this?
Yeah, well, we can't really define, I guess. So what we're doing empirically with these LLMs, because we don't, it's very difficult to know what the training data are for these multilingual models, and it's actually the training data that is that has the biggest effect on cultural knowledge of these models, right? So, and we know that Wikipedia, for example, is a big part of the training data set, especially for languages other than English. But when we look at Wikipedia, of course, the number of articles about that describe certain cultures is going to be very small, and
Yeah.
and also in languages other than English. So that combination of less well-known culture and less well-known language, I think a lot of it, I mean, I think one way to look at the empirical distribution of the knowledge and the language is just counting the number of Wikipedia articles, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a political figure in, I don't know, Greece, and just count the number of Wikipedia articles about that person in the different language versions of Wikipedia, it's going to be much smaller than, let's say, Barack Obama, for example.
Yeah. 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 Whenever I check the same page in Turkish, I'm Turkish, it's so much shorter than the English version of the same
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
You can't find any details.
Right, that's right.
Uh, I see the challenges, but what are the potential solutions for incorporating cross-cultural understanding into LLMs?
Yeah, so that's the biggest challenge. I think it's going to take some time, because, as you know, data is the biggest bottleneck, and so we are trying. Not just our group, but many people around the world, many researchers are trying to generate data using LLMs, using a combination of LLMs and human annotators, scanning in documents, just the combination of all of these, and translating documents from one language to another. And then after you do the translation, maybe some cultural translation as well. So just replacing some of the entities with the entities that are more relevant for a certain culture. So the combination of, just scraping more data by, scanning in documents, having people, human annotators, generate data, like just asking them to write or speak to generate the language data, and then asking LLMs to generate synthetic data, and then having human annotators validate the generated sentences.
Mhm.
So all of that can work. The problem again is for low resource languages and lower popularity cultures. This also becomes very difficult, because when we tried, so we have this paper on Indonesian and Sundanese. And
Mhm.
Sundanese is this local language within Indonesia, and
Mhm.
Indonesian is like medium resource, so the language models are really good at Indonesian. But when you take Sundanese, which also has a pretty large population, I think it's about 30 million speakers. So that's a pretty large population of people who speak this language, but the language models are not very good. And so when we take like English Common Sense QA, for example, and then translate into Indonesian and also into Sundanese, and also ask LLM to, validate whether this common sense question makes sense in Indonesian and Sundanese, and whether it's culturally relevant and so on, and also make it culturally relevant. The language models do very well for Indonesian, but they fail for Sundanese. It just, the generated sentence, the machine translation isn't good. The entity replacement that to make it relevant for Sundanese culture doesn't work. There are little, just lots of mistakes. So then you have to resort to the human annotators. But again, the problem with these low resource languages is that it's difficult to find the human annotators too. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, and but we have to get started somehow.
Yeah, that's very true. And given the significant challenges associated with data set creation in AI research, I really appreciate your effort. But what drives your commitment to this area?
That's a very good question. I asked that myself too.
Because I know
Because
it's super hard. Yeah.
right. It's hard, and it's at the end of the day. I do ask, how many people is this going to affect? Are we making progress? Is this going to be beneficial to my students who are working on these really challenging problems that sometimes it's hard to publish too, because we just don't have the reviewers who can review these papers. But I think so many of my students work on these problems because these are their own languages. So the student who's working on Sundanese is so she's Indonesian, but one of her parents speaks Sundanese, and these local languages in Indonesia and many other parts of the world, the number of speakers is decreasing. So the younger generation actually doesn't speak the language. So it's one way to try to preserve the language and make these language models before all of the native speakers disappear, right? So that's a really important cause, I think. So the bigger picture is that even for languages like Korean, where we do have a lot of resources, I mean, very small compared to English, but compared to other languages, Korean is pretty high resource language. And we have these big tech companies in Korea who are working on these Korean LLMs. But we know that compared to English, the data sets, the benchmark data sets are still very, very little. And so it's still, when I compare the Korean LLM with the English LLM, from a user's perspective, it's still very clunky, and the output of the LLM makes me laugh sometimes, and there's harmful output, there's bias, there's all kinds of problems. And so even for these major languages we have these problems. So that means when these LLMs and more generally generative AI technologies are going to transform the world, the work that we do, the way we study, all of that is going to be transformed. But all the languages other than English and maybe Chinese and maybe a couple of other languages, all of the users are going to be falling behind the English speakers, and that's a big AI divide issue that is going to be a global challenge, global obstacle for us to overcome. So I'm very happy to contribute anything to make that problem, mitigate that problem a little bit.
Yeah. Also, I think the role of the cultural experts is really crucial in the AI research. For example, your Indonesian student, and they can really contribute a lot. And AYA project was one of these initiatives that we tried to use these cultural experts and incorporated their knowledge into the AI systems. And what do you think? How can their insights be integrated more effectively?
Yeah, yeah.
This is very open question, but I'm curious how we can do it better and more effectively.
Yeah, I think AYA project was wonderful. It's the best example that I can think of to get the community involved. And I know, so I spoke with Sarah about this, and and I read the papers, and it's a year long, lots of work, lots
Yes.
of hard work by so many people to make the AYA data set and the models. And it's a wonderful example. I think it will serve as a starting point, because I know that the AYA model, it focused on the number of languages, the breadth of
Yes.
the community, and the resulting data set for instruction following is
Mhm.
great, but we need to do more than that, right? So we need
Right.
training
Yeah.
data sets on top of or before
Mhm.
the instruction following data set.
Yeah,
So,
for better
but I
training as
think,
well. Yeah.
yeah, but I think we can learn from that experience to try to mobilize an entire community of interested people and make them engaged. And I know from the AYA project, it's very difficult to engage people to keep committed to the project. And then there is a similar project that Google has done with Sunipa did this project with Indians and
Mhm.
people in India speaking multiple languages. Actually, they were focused on English, but they were trying to collect common sense knowledge from multiple regions within India, and that was also another community effort to make this data set. So. We haven't actually done in our lab like any community-based data collection, but I think that's the direction that we want to go in.
Yeah. Or maybe we can do it in our regions, in our own languages, and maybe merge the effort.
Yeah. Another thing is actually, so Indonesian, there's and also African languages, there are communities of researchers, right?
Mhm.
So there's a paper called Nusa Crowd, and it's a bunch of researchers and the data sets that they've made from around the world who are doing Indonesian NLP. And so getting all of them together into a community of researchers. So many of them are local in Indonesia, but some are in Singapore, some are in Korea, some are in the US, and so on. And the African NLP community also has that community effort of researchers. And I think that when you look at even lower resource languages, I don't, for example, like we work on Bengali also. So it would be really great if we can get the local Bangladesh universities and researchers. And I don't think currently they have the research capacity to do LLM research. But if we can educate them somehow and get them up to speed, then collaborate with them. And so mobilizing the local research community plus the local native speakers and just building this community would be great.
I think, yeah, I think that's great idea. I hope we can do that very soon. Yeah, just a reminder for the audience, feel free to drop your questions to the Q&A so we can ask those questions to Alice as well. Also, yeah, just recently LLMs have started to be used in educational applications. And I know you also have works in this field. I want to ask, what are the potential benefits and drawbacks of using LLMs for learning experiences?
Yeah, it's so we've done some research, and you probably saw the videos from OpenAI and also Google. So both of those companies have just made a splash, right? So I didn't know that they were working. Well, I knew that Google was working on education. I did well, and I guess I knew about the Khan Academy collaboration with OpenAI, but it was really shocking in a good sense to see those videos. And I think those videos really show the potential for education, personalized education using generative AI. So the OpenAI demo was about triangle, and so like learning about the trigonometric functions like sine, cosine, using multimodal model. And I think so. One thing that LLMs are currently not very good at is being pedagogical. So these when you ask, so in that demo, I don't know exactly how they did it, but it's very difficult to tell prompt the LLM to give hints but not the direct answer. But that's what teachers do, right? So if a student is struggling with the sine, cosine, those functions, the teacher is not going to say, this is how you do sine, this is how you do cosine. The teacher is going to ask, just like GPT-4o is doing, like, what is the hypotenuse, what is the side, relative to this angle alpha, etc. And so how do you get the LLM to do that? But once you can get the LLM to do that, speak like a teacher, then there's tremendous opportunity for personalized education, getting students more engaged, giving education access to a wider population around the world. There's just so much that we can do. And one thing that we did, we had English writing assistant. So here at KAIST, we have students who are not native speakers of English, but we do all our education in English. So the college freshmen they all have to take some English classes. And so for English writing, essay writing class, we built a web-based platform to enable students, to empower students with ChatGPT and ask them to use it in their essay writing. And we capture all of their conversations with ChatGPT. We ask them for each GPT reply, we ask them how satisfied they are. And so we can see like really interesting patterns in their interaction. For example, they initially start conversing in English because they feel like, they have to for some reason. And then they quickly switch to Korean once they figure out that you can actually ask in Korean and they feel more comfortable. And then they switch back and forth. And then they do this like in the middle of the night, at 2 a.m. So we know that college students, they work on their essays, while all of the TAs and professors are sleeping. They say things to the LLM that they wouldn't say to the professor. So for example, like, is that correct? I don't think you're right, right? So like challenging the answer, not accepting the answer as the correct answer. And so just interesting behaviors, but we're just starting to realize the potential for benefit to education, and we're just starting to understand how students may behave when they're interacting with these LLMs as as AI tutors. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think they will really help in providing scalable and accessible educational resources, especially in under-resourced areas. But I think first we need to improve the under-resourced areas in LLMs for that.
That's right. That's right.
What do you think about this? So do you really think it will, I mean, increase the accessible educational resources?
Yeah, definitely. So, locally we have this problem um, of students getting a lot of private tutoring help
Mhm.
for English and math in particular. Um, so we are working with middle school teacher actually, who wants to use LLMs in middle school English classes. And
Mhm.
when we went into the class and talked to the students, their prior knowledge of English is so there's a wide spectrum. So there are students whose parents, are fluent in English, or they take them, they're very rich, so they take them to the U.S., every summer to get exposure to the language or something. And the same thing with math too, right? So if there are students who have private tutoring, so they're very well advanced, and then there are students who struggle and whose parents are not very helpful with their homework or something. And so if you have a classroom, of 30 students, and the spectrum of their level of understanding is so wide spectrum, and then you really can't focus, the teacher can't really focus on each individual student. So we're hoping LLMs can help in that space, such that especially the ones who are struggling with these concepts or with just basic level of English, can pick that up quickly without having to ask these embarrassing questions in class, and etc. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was just recently talking to a friend of mine who is a therapist, and she was doing the therapy practices in German to improve her German because yeah, she's a therapist and wants to do therapy in German, and she's role playing, just asked to role play the LLM as a patient,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, she was doing the therapy with LLM, and she says it's really successful.
That's great.
Anyway, yeah, okay. I want to go to the audience questions now. And Huinwa asked, there are significant differences in the amount of data between countries, and even within each country, there are differences in data depending on popularity and exposure. Is the ultimate goal to overcome these differences? However, we haven't yet overcome these limitations on the internet. So is it possible for AI to do so? The internet is inaccessible in some countries.
Yeah, this is exactly one of the motivations that we as academics, or I guess even researchers in industry, should be working on this problem. We can't just trust the internet to do the right thing, because it's not going to do the right thing. If we are, I mean, I don't know if it's the ultimate goal. I mean, there are thousands of languages. It's obviously very difficult to cover all of them, but we have to at least provide sufficient level of accuracy for language models, or let's say at least the top 200 languages that are used around the world. And as Hyunho has said, we don't have data. So what do you do? Somebody needs to be a champion. So,
Yeah.
for example, I have students who are championing Bengali. They say, we don't have data, the language models don't work well, We don't have the benchmark data sets. The MMLU data set is just translation of English, and it doesn't really work for Bengali. So we need to do better. And so I hope I can inspire lots of students and researchers to champion one or two languages and, collect data, do annotation, train models, do all of that.
Yeah, that would be really great. Another question is, when we are thinking about cross-culture NLP, how do we disentangle weaker general ability in non-English languages versus lack of cultural knowledge?
Yeah, it's difficult to do, but there are ways to. So there is when you translate English data sets, benchmark data sets into these languages, you can measure, for example, the variation in the answer. So like if you ask a math question in English and ask the same math question, you translate it into to Korean and then ask it, then the answer, when you translate it back, it's going to be the same. Hopefully. If it's not the same, then
Yeah.
it lacks the general ability. But when you ask a cultural question, then the answer is going to be vastly different. And also, when you ask people these cultural questions, people's answers are going to also vary, which makes it even more challenging, because when you have 5 different answers for a question, then are the annotators like, did they annotate wrong, or are they just disagreeing in a good way because of the diversity of the culture? It's difficult to know, but when we ask, using different prompts, using different LLMs, the same question, and the answer that you get is consistent, then these are questions for which there is sort of relatively less cultural variation. And then when the answers come out different, then that we need to concentrate and focus on those questions, because they are either culturally diverse in terms of answers, or they're just very difficult questions to answer.
Yeah, okay. Another question is, I'm wondering if we want to have a culturally aware LLM, should we gather the same amount of language data sets or apply transfer learning and train on English first? The first approach would be difficult for lower resource languages, and the second approach might not be able to pick up the cultural information.
Yeah, I really think it depends on your goal, right? So
Yeah.
I think it will depend on the kind of LLM that you want to. I think we're not seeing it yet. It seems
Maybe,
like
yeah.
the LLMs so far are just general purpose LLMs, but we know LLMs are now going to be developed in different ways to have sort of different characteristics. Like IA models, for example, are designed to be just massively multilingual, and so it's a different. I think of it as a different type of LLM, as opposed to Command R plus, which is focused on 10 languages and for accuracy for those 10 languages. And so I think we may have models that are focused on just general ability, including English and just multilingual language ability, as opposed to, which I think most LLMs these days, like GPT-4, I think is a model that is just focused on fluency across different languages and accuracy in their answers. But GPT-4 is culturally very lacking. But we may design language models like the ones that we try to train are using transfer learning or specialized data sets, or in what way we're focusing on building in cultural knowledge into these models.
Yeah. Okay, maybe another question from the chat. So How do cultural differences show up in English language LLMs only, and what kind of customizations can be made there beyond different differences across languages?
Yeah, so one paper that we have, it's going to be presented next week, I think, at NACO, is on hate speech in English in different cultures. And here, the caveat here is that for that paper, we define culture at the country level, which is still it's not exactly, but, if you compare UK versus US, Australia, Singapore, and South Africa, these are five countries in which English is the official language, and there is a large proportion of the population that speak English as their main language. And so when we take a hate speech data set in English and apply it to these other cultures, so we ask people in Singapore, for example, is this hate speech or not? They don't necessarily agree with the American annotators or the UK annotators. So these annotators across the different countries disagree on many of these sentences. And when we collected additional posts that are hate speech within those five different countries in the social media channels that they tend to frequently use. There are many words and many targets of hate that we don't see in the American data set. So in the Australian data set, for example, there is hate speech against the Indigenous people, the Indigenous First Nations people, and they're called abos. And the word abos we don't see in the American data set. So, and then there are other that happens in all of the countries. And there are also local knowledge and local cultures, I guess. So for example, like in America, there's a lot of gun violence. So there are a lot of hate speech about gun violence, but we don't see that in Singapore or in South Africa or in Australia because people don't possess guns in those countries. And so there's certainly a lot of cultural difference, and the LLMs that are trained using mostly American data, right? So when you ask LLMs whether to detect hate speech, they don't do as well. The accuracy goes down significantly for Australia and Singapore and South Africa and so on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is really interesting and requires a lot of research to do. So I want to move to the last part of our conversation. So we know that research is tough at times. Sometimes your hypothesis doesn't work and you only can learn it after months of work, etc. Or everyone has ups and downs during PhD, for example. And what was the most challenging period or thing in your career?
So when I started at KAIST as junior faculty, I probably wasn't ready. Like I didn't do a postdoc after my PhD, and I sort of dove right into my junior faculty years, which was very difficult. I mean, being junior faculty in a tenure track is just tough for everybody. But I had a baby right after I got my job, so that added to my my plate of things, and I felt like I wasn't making progress fast enough. And this plagues pretty much everybody in tenure track, but those were really tough times. And I guess I kind of struggled for at least 5 years in my assistant professor years. Yeah. And I guess my tip would be, I mean, it's easier now that I look back. I don't know if somebody said this to me, I don't know if that would have eased my mind, but to have a longer term view of your career. Even if you struggle in the first few years of your junior faculty or as a postdoc or something, if you keep the one goal that you have in mind and keep working towards it, it's going to pay off, but it may just take a long time. You have to sort of endure through the tough sort of initial years and sort of feed yourself a lot of positive feedback as much as possible, right? So like any positive reward that you get, you get a paper accepted, even if it's just a workshop paper, it's positive feedback that your research is going in the right direction. And so you have to sort of enjoy the small wins that you have and have a longer term view.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I can also ask about your advice to students, PhD students, or students who wants to apply to your group, for example, or to the PhD position. So, yeah, what would be your advices for them?
So, that's a tough question.
Yeah, because people are mostly curious about how they can start to their AI career. So where they can start. What's the most important things to keep in mind and consider?
So I know it's tough for students these days because I know even at KAIST, a lot of the undergrads do research very early on. And
Yes.
so, by the time they graduate from college, they already have papers at these, sometimes these top tier conferences, which was unheard of even like, I don't know, 10 years ago. I think it's just recently that this trend has begun. So, but I think it's not necessary for me, for my group at least. It's not necessary, but I think it is necessary or helpful to know the field, know the research questions that are being asked in a specific group. So in my group, it's as we talked about today, it's using NLP and LLMs to make positive societal impact. So what are the important societal problems that we can try to solve with LLMs, right? Like education is one domain. And so if you show enthusiasm and commitment to making positive impact and not just make the model better on some benchmark data set, but really think about the meaning of the research, then that is good enough for me, for my group. But I know different groups have different standards and requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe the last question. So where do you think AI is headed over the next 5 to 10 years?
Very exciting places. I think we're in the middle of a very exciting phase, and I know that it can be overwhelming. It's overwhelming for me. When I saw those Khan Academy OpenAI video of the triangle, I was so shocked. And I used it in my class, like right after it came out, to show the power of LLM for education. But I think it's so there's a lot of potential for making positive progress and really engaging with the world. So I think, okay, when I say the world, the real world. So I think a lot of AI progress has been made in the last decade on data sets that are somewhat removed from the real world. So, think about ImageNet, and even these LLMs. It's just like predicting the next token, right? And I mean, that's great, but it's only when ChatGPT was released, and then Llama 3 and Gemini and all of these models that can actually interact with everyday people like who are not researchers, that we're trying to solve real world problems. And I think we're just beginning that exciting journey into, what are the real world problems? Where can we help? Drug discovery, healthcare, education, environmental problems, all of these real world, very serious problems can be mitigated with LLMs. I mean, not to say that LLM is the solution to all of these problems, but we can use LLMs to make progress.
Mhm.
But at the same time, so I was just at the AI Safety Summit, with the ministers of countries around the world just today. This happened today, where policymakers are really concerned about the potential harms and risks of AI. And, I don't think they go as far as existential risk, and I don't either, but there are certainly potential harm that can come from misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, potential harmful use by malicious actors, and of course biases and stereotypes that are prevalent in the LLM. So it's an exciting journey for the next 5 years, where the LLMs are going to make so much difference in so many different domains, but we have to be careful about the risks and potential harms as well.
Yeah, I share the same excitement and concerns with you. Yeah, and we just hope it will be really just exciting. Yeah, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. It was really lovely chat, and I'm so grateful. And thanks everyone who attended and for their interest and questions. And yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Beyza, for having me and for your wonderful questions and comments. And thank you, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Cohere, for having this fireside chat. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.